So this is what we are going to make. So let's dive in. As always, I started by properly conditioning the polymer clay. I passed it through the setting number 3 of my Atlas pastel machine, and then I prepared a clay piece that is the right size for the triangle cutter that I intend to use. And then I'm using an old trick. I'm using Scotch tape to cover a part of the clay slab, and you can use Scotch tape, or sometimes I'm also using paper to cover areas where I don't want to apply mica powders, or in this case nail art glitter. And I'm using a stencil with a beautiful pattern. I pressed gently the stencil into the polymer clay, and then I've used purple nail art glitter in the upper part and indigo nail art glitter in the bottom. And in some areas I mixed a little bit the two colors. Then I am also going to apply a little bit of blue nail art glitter, and I really like the look of black clay embellished with nail art glitters. I think they are a winning combination. And then I just placed the stencil on the other side of the Scotch tape and I am going to apply some bluish nail art glitter in the upper part of the design. And I am also going to apply some purple in the bottom. And I recommend you to keep baby wipes near to wipe your hands in between colors, and also to use them to gently wipe your stencil. And then you'll just have to remove the Scotch tape, gently remove the Scotch tape, and voila, you have an area that is not decorated. You can decorate it further with other techniques, or you can just leave it black for an interesting contrast on the piece. But I intend to decorate it further, so I placed a stencil with a narrow multiple arrows pattern, and this time I'm going to use gold metal leaf. And this time I'm using paper to protect the areas where I don't want to have metal leaf, because as you may already know, when working with metal leaf it tends to fly all over the piece, and in order to limit this flying around and the risk of breathing small particles of metal leaf, I recommend you to lightly press the metal leaf in the areas that you want to decorate with metal leaf, and then use your fingers to press it well into the clay and remove the excess. And if you notice that you have a lot of tiny scraps flying around, it's better to hold your breath and use baby wipes to clean your tile after they settle down. I like to have a textured back for my pieces, so I decided to use a floral stamp and press it into the clay. And on the finished piece, this pattern was not very visible, but it's still visible enough to to have an interesting looking on the back as well, because you will surely have a beautiful look on the front when using nail art glitter and gold metal leaf, especially if you want a shiny, eye-catching polymer clay pieces look. So I flipped the polymer clay that I textured with the floral stamp, and then I put the clay decorated with nail art glitters and metal leaf on top. I've used parchment paper. You can use parchment paper to gently press the layers together, but gently, you don't want to distort the textured back, of course. And then I decided to use a rather large round cutter to cut a round piece. And as you can see, I'm cutting it slightly offset. I could have opted for a symmetrical pattern. I could have placed this gold metal arrow line in the middle. You should take the time and smooth off the edges. And then I decided to work a little bit more on this piece, and I've used the blade and I cut the area decorated with the gold metal arrow in half. I'm just going to cut thin strips of black polymer clay, and it's again polymer clay that I passed through the setting number 3 of my Atlas pastel machine. And I'm going to make tiny spirals, tiny rolls of black clay. And I'm going to make 5 such tiny spirals. And I intend to place them in between the 2 pieces of polymer clay. And I want to add more drama, make this pendant even more exciting, and just have to take the time and align the 2 cutout areas on the sides, and then place these spirals in between. And you will notice that there is a gap in the upper part, in the bottom, beneath these spiraling designs. I didn't want to put 7 spirals because I wanted to have these cutout areas. Now the most important thing is to press gently, of course, gently press these elements together. And in fact, I decided to use a sculpting tool. You can use a toothpick or a needle tool. And I think that the best thing to do at this time is to put together these elements on top of the tile on which you are going to bake the pieces. And I'm baking my pieces on a tile wrapped in parchment paper. I'm pressing these spiraling elements into the clay elements decorated with nail art glitter, and also into each other. And then I decided to use a small round cutter and make an opening, and this is going to allow me to insert a jump ring and attach this pendant. Then when you are happy with the look of the piece, after checking that you have smoothed off the margins, that you have a very good addition between all the elements of the piece, you can put it in the oven on parchment paper and bake it for 45 minutes in the preheated oven at the recommended temperature. I also tend my pieces. You'll have to let the clay cool down, and it's time for the last step of the process, meaning applying UV resin. I am going to put a metallic cutter underneath because I want to elevate this piece from my raise it up from my working table. And I have to tell you that you have to be very careful not to put too much resin. So I'm starting from the middle, and I'm using the a tip of the resin bottle to spread. I had a little bit of drippings on the back in between the black spiraling elements, but I used rubbing alcohol that I put on baby wipes, and I thoroughly cleaned this area. And also you have to be very careful when putting resin around the area where you poked the hole. But I really like the way resin enhances the beautiful effect of the glitter and the metal foil, and really gives this piece a faux glass look that and really gives this piece a fabulous faux glass look, in my opinion. Of course, I'm using a cutter. I'm not using my best cutters when I'm using a metallic cutter to brace my pieces, because there is a risk of having resin drippings and I don't want to damage my best cutters. You could use scraps of scrap clay that you can roll into balls and put them on your tile, and then put your pieces put your pendant on top and press it gently into this scrap clay. But you have to make sure that your piece stays that your piece is not tilted, because if not, you will have resin drippings. Covering the sides of the piece with UV resin, and in the same time I'm checking to see if there are gaps in these areas where I need to put more resin. I'm also checking the sides, and you might need to wait a little bit, half a minute, 1 minute, to let the resin level up and make sure that you don't have gaps. And then I use the heat gun to remove any air bubbles. I don't really see air bubbles, but there might be some, so it's better to use a heat gun to make sure that you remove any air bubbles. And then when you are happy with the look of the piece coated with UV resin, you can use a UV lamp and cure the resin. I'm using a fast drying UV lamp, and I only had to cure the resin for 2 consecutive minutes. I liked the way the piece looked with only 1 layer of UV resin. Sometimes I might pour even a second layer, but for this piece, because I already liked the way it looked, and because of the intricate spiraling design which has tiny openings, I prefer to stick with applying only 1 layer, but the result was very beautiful, so I did not really feel that this piece needed even more resin. Thank you for watching the tutorial. I totally encourage you to take this inspiration and use it in your work with polymer clay. And here's what to watch next.